The morning a woman looked at my hands and decided they weren't good enough to hold my own grandson, she probably thought she was making a small decision. She wasn't. She was starting something that would take nearly 8 years to finish. My name is Thomas Mercer, and back then I was 65 years old. I'd spent 34 years teaching American history at a public middle school outside Birmingham, Alabama. I wasn't rich. Never pretended to be. My wife, Helen, and I lived in the same modest brick house we'd bought when our son was still learning to walk. I drove an old Ford pickup. I wore work boots more often than dress shoes. My hands were rough from woodworking, gardening, fixing things around the house, and spending half my life refusing to pay somebody for a job I could figure out myself. But our home was clean. Our bills were paid. And if somebody we loved needed us, we showed up. That's why I was awake before 4 in the morning on December 2nd, 8 years ago. I couldn't sleep. Our only son, Michael, had called 3 days earlier. His wife, Claire, had given birth to their first child. A boy, 8 pounds even. They named him Ethan. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed after Michael called, staring at the wall with this ridiculous grin on my face. A grandson. I was somebody's grandfather. Helen started crying before Michael had even finished telling us the baby's weight. By the morning of our visit, she'd already packed enough food to feed a family of 6. They're new parents, she told me. They won't want to cook. Helen, they live 20 minutes from 3 grocery stores. That doesn't mean they should be cooking. There was no point arguing. We left our house outside Birmingham just after 6. Michael and Claire lived near Huntsville in one of those newer neighborhoods where the lawns looked professionally measured and every mailbox seemed approved by a committee. It was about a 2-hour drive. Helen wore a pale green dress she usually saved for church. I had on khaki pants and the nicest button-down shirt I owned. But the thing I cared about most was lying across the back seat. A wooden rocking horse. I'd spent almost 2 months making it. Solid walnut. Hand-sanded. No sharp edges. I had carved Ethan into one side and burned the letters into the wood. Was it too early for him to use it? Of course. The boy couldn't even hold his own head up. I didn't care. I wanted him to have something his grandfather had made with his own hands. During the drive, Helen turned around at least 6 times to check the blanket we'd wrapped around it. You think they'll like it? You've asked me that 4 times. And, yes, Claire likes modern things. It's a rocking horse, Helen, not a kitchen remodel. She laughed. I remember that laugh. Sometimes the ordinary moments become the ones you remember most clearly because you didn't know you were standing 5 minutes away from your life changing. We pulled into Michael's driveway shortly after 9. There were already 2 expensive cars parked outside. Claire's parents. Her father, Charles Whitman, owned several commercial properties around northern Alabama. Her mother, Diane, was one of those women who could somehow make sitting on a couch look formal. I'd met them before. They were polite. Not warm, exactly, but polite. I lifted the rocking horse from the truck. Helen carried the food. We walked to the door. Michael answered. He looked exhausted, but happy. That kind of tired only a new father can wear. Dad. He hugged me. Then his mother. You made it. Of course we made it. He looked down at the rocking horse. Is that what I think it is? Depends. What do you think it is? He smiled. Come inside. And that was the last easy moment of the morning. The house smelled like flowers, vanilla candles, and new furniture. Everything was white, beige, or some shade I probably would have called white until Claire explained why it wasn't. We followed Michael into the living room. Then I saw him. My grandson. Ethan was sleeping in a bassinet beside the couch, wrapped in a light blue blanket. I've taught hundreds of children. I've watched my own son grow from a baby into a man. But there is something different about seeing your grandchild for the first time. Something happens inside you. It's like your heart recognizes somebody before your mind has even caught up. Helen grabbed my arm. Oh, Tom. That was all she could say. Claire was sitting on the couch. Diane sat beside her. Charles was in an armchair near the window. I smiled and stepped toward the bassinet. I wasn't thinking. Why would I? I was a grandfather walking toward his grandson. I held out my hands. And Claire stood. Fast. She stepped directly between me and Ethan. At first, I thought maybe the baby was sleeping and she didn't want me waking him. Then I saw her face. Thomas, she said. Not Dad. Not Grandpa. Thomas. I'd rather you didn't pick him up. I stopped. Oh, is he sleeping badly? No. She looked down at my hands. Then at my boots. Then at Helen. And what she said next has never left me. I'm just trying to be careful about germs. You two live differently than we're used to. And with your workshop and everything, I don't think it's a good idea for you to handle him right now." For a second, I genuinely didn't understand. Then she made it clearer. "Please don't touch him." She looked at Helen. "You either." Nobody moved. I looked at Michael. My son stared at the floor. That was the part that hurt. Not Claire. Her opinion of me wasn't important enough to break my heart. But my son? The boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle. The boy whose first car I'd kept running with junkyard parts because we couldn't afford another one. The boy Helen stayed awake with for 3 nights when he had pneumonia at 11. He stood 10 feet away and looked at the floor. Helen's fingers closed around my arm. Then Diane stood. She walked past us, lifted Ethan from the bassinet, and carried him toward the hallway, like it had been planned. Helen watched another grandmother take our grandson away. I felt her grip tighten. She didn't cry. That would come later. I put the rocking horse down beside the coffee table. Carefully, I straightened up. "Congratulations," I said. Michael finally looked at me. "Dad, it's all right." It wasn't. But I wasn't going to beg somebody for permission to be treated with basic dignity. I put my hand against Helen's back. "We should go." Claire didn't stop us. Neither did her parents. Michael followed us to the front door. "Dad, wait." I turned. He had every opportunity. One sentence would have done it. That was wrong. "Come back inside. You're my parents." Anything. Instead, he said, "I'll call you." I nodded. "All right." Then Helen and I drove home. For the first 40 minutes, neither of us spoke. The food she'd made was still in the back. Nobody had even taken it out of her hands. Finally, she looked through the passenger window and whispered, "She thought we were dirty." "I know. Our house is cleaner than theirs." "I know." And Diane took him away from me. Her voice cracked. That was when I had to grip the steering wheel harder. "I know, sweetheart." She wiped her cheek. I didn't even get to touch him. Neither had I. We reached home shortly before noon. Helen carried the food inside. I took off my good shirt, changed into an old work shirt, and walked out to my workshop. The rocking horse was still in Huntsville. That bothered me more than it should have. I sat on my stool, looked at the empty space where it had stood for weeks, and cried. Not dramatically. No shouting. No punching walls. I just sat there with my hands over my face and cried because I'd waited my whole life to meet that little boy. And when the moment came, somebody had looked at me like I wasn't fit to touch him. I expected Michael to call that night. He didn't. I expected him to call the next morning. Nothing. 3 days. A week. Then 2. Christmas came. Helen bought Ethan a little stuffed bear. I carved a wooden train. We mailed both. I included a card. "Your Grandma Helen and Grandpa Tom love you very much. Merry First Christmas." We received a card from Michael. Printed. Signed in pen. "Thanks for thinking of us. Merry Christmas." That was it. Years later, I learned the truth. But at the time, I thought my son had simply chosen his wife and her family over us. So I stopped chasing him. I did not stop loving him. There's a difference. Every Christmas, we sent something. Every birthday, too. When Ethan turned 2, I carved him wooden animals. At 3, a little truck. At 4, children's books and a handmade bookshelf. At 5, a beginner's tool set I'd carefully modified so nothing could hurt him. Helen wrote cards. Long ones. She told him about the tomatoes in our garden. She told him about birds nesting under the porch roof. She told him stories about Michael when he was a boy. We never received an answer. Not once. So we lived. What else could we do? I worked in my garden. I volunteered at my old school twice a week, helping kids with woodworking and tutoring history. Helen kept her flowers. We went to church on Sundays. On Friday nights, we sometimes drove into town for catfish. Our life wasn't miserable. That's important. Pain can live beside happiness. You can laugh with your wife at breakfast and still feel an empty place inside you. You can enjoy a beautiful afternoon and wonder what your grandson's voice sounds like. Every year on Ethan's birthday, Helen baked a small chocolate cake. Just 1 layer. The first time she did it, I asked why. She shrugged. Somebody should. We ate 2 slices. Then she wrapped the rest. By Ethan's 6th birthday, I stopped asking. At night, before I went to bed, I developed a habit. I'd sit at the kitchen table. I'd look toward the dark window above the sink. And I'd say the same thing. "Lord, let me meet that boy before I'm gone." That was my prayer. Not revenge. Not punishment. Just time. What I didn't know was that things inside Michael's beautiful house were falling apart. I learned all of this later. Claire had taken control of almost every connection between Michael and us. Mail arrived. Claire handled it. Packages. Claire. Phone calls. If she saw our number, she'd find a reason Michael couldn't talk. When Michael mentioned visiting us, she'd start a fight. Sometimes she'd tell him we'd said things we never said. Other times she'd claim I had insulted her. She convinced him that keeping distance was easier than dealing with conflict. And my son let her. That's the part Michael still takes responsibility for. He wasn't innocent. He was afraid. There's a difference. He wanted peace inside his house so badly that he sacrificed the people outside it. But peace bought with silence isn't peace. Eventually the bill arrives. Michael started drinking. 1 bourbon after work. Then 2. Then 3. He still performed well at his job. Still wore the suit. Still attended school functions. Still smiled for family photographs. But inside, guilt was eating him alive. Then one evening, when Ethan was 7, the boy asked a question. "Dad, where are your parents?" Michael looked up. "What?" "Mom has Grandma Diane and Grandpa Charles. Where are your mom and dad?" Claire immediately said, "Ethan, finish your dinner." But children know when adults are hiding something. "Are they dead?" Michael told me later that question felt like being punched. "No." "Then where are they?" Michael looked at Claire. She stared back. "It's complicated," he said. Ethan frowned. "Why?" Michael couldn't answer. He got up from the table, went into the bathroom, locked the door, and cried. That question started the crack. The thing that finally broke the wall came from somewhere none of us expected. One of my former students was named Ryan Parker. I taught Ryan in 1998. Smart kid. Terrible at paying attention. He used to sketch buildings in the margins of every assignment. One afternoon, I caught him doing it during a lesson on reconstruction. I told him to stay after class. He expected detention. Instead, I asked what he was drawing. A library. You ever been inside a library that looks like that? No, sir. Then where'd you get it? He tapped his forehead. Here. I told him something I barely remembered years later. Then don't waste what's in there. Ryan became an architect. A good one. Almost 25 years later, he contacted a local newspaper about doing a feature on teachers who had influenced people's lives. He mentioned me. A reporter came to the workshop. We talked for 2 hours. They took photographs. The article ran on Sunday. The headline was, "The Teacher Who Let US Build Our Own Futures." I thought it was nice. Helen bought 6 copies. I teased her for buying 6. Then the article started circulating online. Former students shared it. Parents wrote comments. People called the school asking whether I still volunteered there. One man drove 40 miles just to shake my hand. And in Huntsville, my son saw it. Michael sat in his car in the driveway and read the article twice. Then he looked at a photograph of me standing in my workshop. He hadn't seen my face in years. 2 nights later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I nearly ignored it. Something made me answer. Hello. Silence. Then, Dad? You know your child's voice. I don't care if they're 7 or 47. You know. Michael? His breathing changed. Yeah. I sat down. Helen looked over from the couch. I saw the article. Okay. Another silence. Dad, I need to see you. I didn't answer immediately. Can I come down Saturday? I looked at Helen. She knew. She could see it on my face. Her hand went to her mouth. Come down, I said. There's somebody I want to bring. My heart started pounding. Who? Ethan. Helen started crying before I even hung up. Saturday morning arrived. At 10:17, a dark SUV pulled into our driveway. I know the exact time because I'd been staring at the clock since 9. Michael stepped out. Older. Thinner. He looked tired in a different way than he had the day Ethan was born. Then the passenger door opened. A boy climbed out. 7 years old. Brown hair. Skinny legs. Serious eyes. He walked beside Michael toward the porch. I opened the door before they could knock. Michael stopped. Neither of us spoke. Then Ethan looked up at me. Are you Grandpa Tom? I had imagined that moment thousands of times. In none of those imaginary versions did I lose the ability to speak. But I did. Finally I said, Yes, sir. He looked at Michael. Then back at me. Dad says you make things out of wood. I laughed. A strange little broken laugh. I do. Can you teach me? I knelt. I'd love to. Then he hugged me. No hesitation. No fear of my hands. He wrapped his arms around my neck. I closed my eyes. 7 years. 7 years of birthdays. 7 Christmas mornings. 7 years of prayers at the kitchen table. and suddenly the boy was in my arms. Behind me, Helen made a sound. Ethan pulled away and looked at her. "Are you Grandma Helen?" She nodded. He hugged her too. My wife held that child like she was trying to make up for every hug she'd missed. Michael stood on the porch crying. I looked at him over Ethan's shoulder. For the first time in years, my son looked me directly in the eye. We spent most of that morning in the workshop. Ethan wanted to touch everything. I showed him how a vise worked, how to measure twice before cutting once, how different wood smelled, how sandpaper felt depending on the grit. We built a small birdhouse. It leaned slightly to the left. Ethan thought it was perfect. So did I. After lunch, Helen took him into the garden. Michael and I stayed at the kitchen table. 2 cups of coffee between us. He stared into his cup. "Dad." I waited. "I'm sorry." His voice cracked. I should have stopped her that day. I said nothing. I knew it was wrong. I knew it while it was happening. I saw Mom's face. I saw yours. And I stood there. He wiped his eyes. I told myself I was avoiding a fight. Then every year it got harder to admit what I'd done. He looked at me. I was ashamed. "Michael." "No. Let me say it." So I did. "I failed you. I failed Mom. And I failed Ethan because I let him grow up thinking he didn't have grandparents on my side." He covered his face. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I reached across the table, put my hand on his forearm. The same rough hand Claire once believed wasn't clean enough to touch her child. "Your coffee's getting cold." Michael stared at me. Then he laughed. And I laughed. That was how we started again. Not with some grand speech. Coffee. After that, Michael brought Ethan down every few weeks. At first, Claire didn't know. I didn't like the secrecy, but I understood why Michael was doing it. He was still finding his backbone. And sometimes a backbone doesn't grow all at once. Ethan became part of our home remarkably fast. He helped Helen garden. He built things with me. He asked questions constantly. One Saturday, he noticed the empty place on a shelf in my workshop. "What's supposed to go there?" I smiled. "Nothing anymore." But there had been something. The memory of that rocking horse. Meanwhile, Michael started paying attention at home. Really paying attention. He noticed how Claire reacted whenever my name came up. He noticed mail disappearing. He noticed that she knew details about packages she claimed had never arrived. Then one afternoon, while looking for old tax documents, he climbed into the attic. Behind Christmas decorations and luggage, he found a large plastic storage bin. Inside were 7 years of us. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, books, wooden toys, letters from Helen. Everything. Unopened. Hidden. Michael sat on the attic floor and went through them one by one. Then he found a card Helen had written for Ethan's 5th birthday. Inside she had written, "We don't know when we'll get to meet you properly, sweetheart, but please know there hasn't been one day when your grandpa and I haven't loved you." Michael carried the entire box downstairs. He put it on the kitchen table. When Claire came home, she saw it. She froze. "You told me they stopped contacting us." Claire said nothing. 7 years. Nothing. My mother wrote to my son for 7 years. Finally, Claire crossed her arms. They were interfering. How can somebody interfere when you won't even let them speak to him? I was protecting our family. From what? She had no answer. Then she said the sentence that ended their marriage. "It's them or me." Michael looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "You made me choose that once." He pointed at the box. "I won't do it again." He filed for divorce 6 weeks later. Claire fought. Hard. She told friends Michael had a drinking problem, which was true. What she didn't mention was that Michael had already stopped drinking and had begun seeing a counselor. She claimed his sudden relationship with us was destabilizing Ethan. She suggested I was manipulating him. She called our house unsuitable. That one almost made me laugh. Then, one Thursday afternoon, somebody knocked on my front door. I was in the workshop. Helen was cooking. I wiped my hands and went inside. When I opened the door, Claire was standing there. Beside her was Ethan. For a second, none of us spoke. She looked different. Still dressed nicely. Still put together. But exhausted. Tom. Interesting. Not Thomas anymore. Not quite Dad either. "Claire, can we come in?" I stepped aside. Ethan immediately walked toward the kitchen. "Grandma." Helen appeared. Her entire face changed. "There's my boy." Ethan hugged her. Claire watched. I saw something pass across her face. Maybe jealousy. Maybe regret. Maybe just the realization that the relationship she'd spent years preventing now existed without her permission. We sat in the living room. She started talking. About Ethan. about stability, about divorce hurting children, about families needing to stay together. She said Michael wasn't thinking clearly. She said he listened to me. Then I understood. You want me to convince him not to divorce you. She looked down. I want you to help your son save his family. I leaned back. Claire, my son called me after 7 years because he wanted his father back. I didn't tell him to leave you. But you're encouraging this. No. I shook my head. I'm refusing to lie to him. She started crying. Maybe the tears were real. I think some of them were. People can do terrible things and still feel genuine pain when consequences arrive. Please, Tom. I looked toward the kitchen. Ethan was laughing at something Helen had said. Why did you bring him? Claire frowned. What? Why is Ethan here? I couldn't leave him. Michael told me his friend offered to keep him today. Her face changed. Michael had called me that morning. He knew Claire was coming. He knew she might bring Ethan. That was when I realized the boy wasn't simply along for the ride. He was part of the argument. I stood. Come with me. I led Claire toward the workshop. Helen and Ethan followed. A few minutes later, Michael's SUV pulled into the driveway. Claire heard it. She looked at me. You called him? No. He called me. Michael entered through the back door. He looked at Claire, then at Ethan, then at me. Nobody needed an explanation. Along one wall of my workshop were several shelves. After Michael discovered the hidden box, he'd brought everything to us. Helen and I organized it by year. Birthday, Christmas, birthday, Christmas. 7 years of love stacked in neat rows. Claire stared. I walked to the workbench and picked up a folder. There is something else you should know. I put it down. Every year we sent Ethan a gift. She said nothing. When we couldn't be part of his life, I started putting money aside. I opened the folder. I figured if I couldn't give him my time, maybe someday I could help give him choices. Michael knew about the account. Claire didn't. It wasn't some enormous fortune. I wasn't secretly a millionaire. But 34 years of teaching had taught me something about patience. Small amounts become large amounts when you give them enough time. Helen and I had contributed every birthday, every Christmas, sometimes $50, sometimes $200. After I retired, I started selling a few pieces of furniture and putting part of that money in. The account had grown enough to cover most of Ethan's college education at an in-state university. Claire stared at the statement. Her hands trembled. The man whose home she'd considered too dirty for her baby had been quietly saving for that baby's future for 7 years. I didn't smile. It wasn't funny. Then Ethan spoke. Mom. Claire looked at him. He pointed toward the shelves. Are those all mine? Nobody answered immediately. Grandpa sent all those. I nodded. And Grandma. She wrote most of the cards. He looked at his mother. Why didn't I get them? Claire opened her mouth. Michael stepped forward. Ethan, that's something your mom and I will talk to you about. The boy looked at the shelves again. Then he walked over and picked up the wooden truck I'd made when he was 4. He rolled it across the workbench. It still works. Wood doesn't expire, I said. He smiled. Then he looked at me. Can I keep it? Son, it was always yours. Claire started crying again. This time she turned away. I could have said 100 cruel things. I had earned the opportunity. At least that's what some people would say. I could have reminded her of that first day. Her face. Her words. Her looking at my hands. I could have asked whether I was clean enough now. I didn't. Because revenge isn't always saying the thing you've waited years to say. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is discover you no longer need to say it. Claire. She looked at me. I never wanted your marriage to fail. She wiped her cheek. I never wanted Ethan to lose his mother. And I never spent these years trying to punish you. She stared at me. Then what did you want? I looked at Ethan. That. He was sitting beside Helen, examining the wooden truck. I wanted to know my grandson. The room became quiet. Then I said the only thing I felt needed saying. You spent years trying to make sure he forgot us. But love doesn't always need permission to survive. Claire looked down. Michael walked her outside. I stayed with Ethan. They talked in the driveway for nearly 20 minutes. I don't know everything that was said. I never asked. When Michael came back inside, he looked exhausted, but lighter. The divorce took almost a year. It was ugly. Divorces usually are. There were lawyers, custody evaluations, arguments, accusations. But the hidden letters mattered. So did Claire's attempts to isolate Michael from his family. Michael's drinking was addressed honestly. He continued counseling. He stayed sober. In the end, they received shared custody, with Michael having the larger share of school week responsibilities. And slowly, our family found a new shape. Not the old shape. That one was gone. People make the mistake of thinking reconciliation means going backward. It doesn't. You can't go back. You build something new from what survived. Michael and I talk almost every day now. Sometimes for 5 minutes. Sometimes for an hour. Helen talks to him even more. Ethan spends plenty of weekends with us. He's 15 now. Almost as tall as his father. And those hands Claire once didn't want near him? They're teaching him woodworking. His hands aren't soft anymore either. He's got a little scar near his thumb from ignoring me when I told him not to rush with a handsaw. I made him clean it himself. Helen accused me of enjoying the lesson too much. Maybe I did. The rocking horse is still at Michael's house. Yes, that original rocking horse. For years I assumed Claire had thrown it away. She hadn't. Michael found it in a storage room during the divorce. Still wrapped. Still perfect. Ethan burned into the side. He brought it to us. Ethan was far too big for it by then. But we cleaned it. Polished it. And Michael keeps it in his living room. Maybe it'll be for Ethan's kids someday, he told me. I had to walk outside after he said that. Couldn't let everybody see an old man getting emotional over a wooden horse. Helen saw anyway. She always does. Last summer, Ethan and I built a dining table together. Oak. Heavy enough that Michael complained for 20 straight minutes while helping us move it. Underneath the tabletop, where nobody can see unless they crawl under, Ethan carved something. I didn't know he'd done it until later. For words. Built with Grandpa Tom. I sat under that table longer than I'd care to admit. People sometimes ask if I ever forgave Claire. That's complicated. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It doesn't mean giving somebody access to your life again. And it doesn't erase consequences. Claire and I are civil. That's all. When she picks Ethan up, I say hello. She says hello. Helen is kinder to her than I probably would be on my own. That's Helen. Michael and Claire learned to co-parent. Some days better than others. And Ethan loves his mother. I'm glad he does. A child shouldn't have to hate one parent to prove loyalty to another. That isn't love. That's another kind of prison. As for me, I'm 73 now. My knees hurt when the weather changes. I can't work in the shop for 6 straight hours anymore. Helen says my hearing is getting worse. I say she started mumbling. We've agreed to disagree. Every Saturday Ethan is with us. He still comes into the workshop. Sometimes he doesn't need help anymore. That's the strange reward of teaching somebody well. Eventually, they stop needing you to stand beside them. A few months ago, I walked into the workshop and found him working alone. Safety glasses on. Music playing quietly. He was making a small wooden box. I leaned against the doorway. What are you building? He immediately covered it. Nothing. That's clearly something. It's a surprise. For who? He smiled. Grandma. So I left him alone. As I walked back toward the house, I stopped in the yard. Through the kitchen window, I could see Helen preparing lunch. Behind me, I could hear Ethan sanding wood. And I thought about that morning 8 years earlier. The clean clothes. The rocking horse. The long drive. The woman stepping between me and my grandson. Don't touch him. Funny how life works. Back then, I thought those words were the end of something. They weren't. They were only the beginning. I spent years believing justice would mean Claire apologizing, or admitting she was wrong, or suffering some dramatic humiliation. But age teaches you things. Justice wasn't watching her marriage collapse. It wasn't the lawyers. It wasn't the hidden cards being discovered. It wasn't even seeing her face when she learned about Ethan's college fund. Justice was standing in my workshop years later and watching my grandson use the same kind of hands she'd once looked down on. Hands covered in sawdust. Hands building something. Hands learning patience. Hands creating instead of destroying. That was enough. More than enough. Because in the end, I didn't beat Claire. I didn't need to. Time did what anger never could. It exposed what was true. She tried to erase us from Ethan's life. We kept loving him anyway. She hid our letters. We kept writing. She hid our gifts. We kept giving. She closed a door. We refused to become bitter while we waited for another one to open. And when it finally did, we were still standing there. That's the part I'm proud of. Not that Claire lost. That we didn't let what she did turn us into people Ethan wouldn't have wanted to know. The last time he stayed over, Ethan and I were sitting on the porch after dinner. He's old enough now to understand most of what happened. Not every ugly detail, but enough. He looked at me and said, "Grandpa, yeah. Were you ever mad at Mom?" I laughed. "Son, I was furious." He smiled. "But you don't act like it." I had 8 years to practice. He thought about that, then asked, "Why didn't you fight harder?" That question stayed with me. I looked out at the yard. Because there are different kinds of fighting. He waited. Sometimes fighting means kicking a door down. Sometimes it means refusing to walk away from the door even when nobody opens it. He nodded slowly. Then he looked at his hands. Hands with a little sawdust still stuck around the fingernails. "I think I understand." Maybe he did. Maybe he'll understand better when he's my age. Either way, I put my arm around his shoulder. And this time, nobody told me I couldn't touch my grandson. So if you're listening to my story, I want to leave you with one question. If someone tried to erase you from the life of a person you loved, would you fight back immediately? Or would you have the strength to keep loving them quietly until the truth finally opened the door?